In a heavy, suffocating silence, you can feel the weight of the atmosphere in the grand hall. Everyone is holding their breath, waiting for a single voice to cut through the tension. The Empress sits high on her throne, bathed in light, looking down at the gathered nobles and their offerings from the hunt. She doesn't look impressed. In fact, she looks almost bored, like this is just another tedious chore she has to endure. She finally speaks, announcing that it's time to decide who gets the glory. Her eyes sweep over the trophies and she makes a choice that surprises the room. She ignores the massive beasts and points out a fox, specifically its vivid scarlet fur. She asks whose prey it is, and when Countess Frances claims it, the Empress declares her the victor of the founding festival hunt. The murmurs start immediately. You can practically hear the confusion rippling through the crowd. One brave soul, or perhaps a foolish one, tries to interject, suggesting that the honor should surely go to someone else. They gesture toward the massive catches brought in by the heavy hitters, Marquis Bjorn and Grand Duke Roark, but the Empress shuts that down with icy precision. She points out that the Marquis's boar was so badly torn by his blade that the hide was ruined. It was a messy kill. Then she turns her gaze to the Duke's white deer. At a glance it looks perfect, but she notes the foam of blood in its mouth. She explains that this is a sign the hunter purposely prolonged the chase instead of killing it cleanly. Her eyes narrow, and for a second she looks directly at the Duke. She lectures the room on dignity, saying that even a beast deserves a clean death. She admits there might be prey rarer or more expensive than a fox, but she implies there isn't a hunter worthy of her praise among the men. It's a subtle, public slap to the face, especially for the Grand Duke. The loyal dog, the two powerful men, Grand Duke Roark and Marquis Bjorn, take the criticism without a fight. They bow their heads, claiming they couldn't dare disagree with the great son of the Empire. It's all very formal, very rehearsed. The Empress dismisses the tension by announcing the grand banquet to celebrate the Empire's 200th anniversary, telling them to enjoy themselves. As she leaves, the facade cracks a little among the men. Marquis Bjorn, who looks like the type to hold a grudge, immediately starts poking at the Duke. He offers a fake pity, mentioning how unfortunate it was that the Duke's beautiful silver deer was rejected. He digs deeper, making a snide comment about how the Duke's skills, honed from a lifetime guarding the border, are still sharp, yet the Empress won't open her heart to him. The Marquis calls the Duke the Empress's dog under his breath, marking his blind obedience. But the Duke just stands there, stoic and unbothered, his face unreadable as he watches the Empress's carriage retreat. Behind closed doors, the scene shifts to the Empress's private chambers, and the vibe changes completely. She's alone, or so she thinks, and she lets out a heavy, exhausted sigh. The iron composure she held in the throne room dissolves. She admits to herself that the bustle of the hunt has left her completely drained. She asks for cold water and a glass appears in her vision, but as she reaches for it, she realizes the hand holding the glass isn't a servant's. She looks up and freezes. It's Duke Roark. He's somehow already there, attending to her personally. She immediately stiffens, asking him why he's there and not at the banquet. He ignores the question and points out that she doesn't look well, suggesting he call the court physician. She snaps at him, telling him to forget the doctor and just leave. She's trying to push him away, her voice sharp, commanding him to get out. He pauses, looking at her with this intense, quiet sorrow. He apologizes for overstepping and asks for forgiveness just this once. He bows and agrees to leave so she can rest. It's a heavy moment. You can tell he doesn't want to go, and she doesn't really want him to go, but neither knows how to bridge the gap. After that, everybody started talking about her rude behavior, and then after some time, she also leaves the room. As the Duke exits her chambers, he runs right into Marquis Bjorn again in the hallway. Bjorn is leaning there, waiting to twist the knife. He asks what the Empress was so aggravated about this time, pretending to sympathize with how cold she is to the Duke despite his loyalty. Bjorn pushes it too far when he starts implying that the only reason she sits on the throne is thanks to the Duke's support, practically calling her illegitimate or weak without him. That's the breaking point. The Duke stops. He doesn't shout, but his voice drops to a lethal whisper. He warns the Marquis that while he understands the need for banter, he needs to watch his tongue when speaking of royal blood. It's a clear threat. Insult me all you want, but do not insult her. Back inside the room, the Empress is trying to drown herself in paperwork. She's sitting at her desk, looking miserable, clutching a pen like a lifeline. She's so lost in her thoughts that she drops something, a pen or a letter opener, and gasps as it clatters to the floor. There's a drop of blood. She might have pricked herself in her agitation. Suddenly the door clicks open. She didn't answer a knock, but someone entered anyway. It's the Duke. He's back. He walks in, noting that he knocked, but assumed he had permission when she didn't answer. He sees her buried in scraps of paper and looks displeased. She stammers, flustered, asking why he isn't at the banquet. He tells her simply that he couldn't enjoy the party with an easy mind, knowing his liege was unwell. But then, the energy in the room shifts from formal to intimate. He walks over to the door and deliberately locks it. The sound of the lock clicking is loud in the quiet room. He mentions casually that he was late because he had to chase off a few pests, referring to the Marquis, and walks toward her desk. She tries to maintain regain her composure, but she's pale. He tells her she always overworks herself and that it worries him. She finally relents, agreeing to rest, and tells him to head back to the party. But he doesn't leave. Instead, he reaches out. Papers fly off the desk as he moves into her personal space. He pulls her close, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb grazing her cheek. He leans in, his face inches from hers, and whispers that he did promise to head back, but only after he makes sure of something. They were wrapped in each other's arms, the rest of the world locked out, leaving us wondering just how he intends to make sure she's all right. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly from tension to something much more physical and overwhelming. The Duke has the Empress pinned, his composure from the hallway completely gone. He looms over her, his eyes dark and intense, noticing how her body betrays her even if her words don't. He leans in close, whispering that normally he would take his time to please her, but today is different. The moment shifts into something private, and time passes quietly between them as the physical distance closes completely. He admits, his voice ragged, that he's finding it hard to hold back today. He warns her that he might be a little rough because he is still feeling spiteful over what happened earlier at the hunt. The Empress, flushed and disoriented, stammers, confused about what he means. He clarifies, his voice dropping low, that the catch he brought, the one she publicly rejected, was hard-won specifically to please her. He asks her directly if it didn't please her. She tries to explain, stuttering that she had no intention of belittling his prize. She apologizes, breathless, saying she's sorry if it upset him. He doesn't let up. He seems to revel in her reactions, calling her innocent despite their intimacy. He tells her that her sensitivity to every touch only makes him want to tease her more. The dynamic shifts again. Even in this vulnerable state, the Empress tries to maintain some semblance of control or distance, but he won't allow it. He demands she hold him properly. He leans down, his expression softening just a fraction, and tells her he doesn't want her precious body getting hurt. Suddenly, he notices something that seems to annoy him. Even now, in the middle of this, her eyes are drifting to the paperwork on the desk. He looks at her with disbelief, asking if she really wants to attend to state affairs in a situation like this. He scoffs, muttering about how a woman as bothersome and irritating as her could even exist. He complains that even though they haven't just done this once or twice, he still has to put in so much effort every single time. It's a strange mix of complaint and devotion. He's annoyed, yet he's still there, serving her needs. He points out that she's holding on to him tightly right now, unable to let go. He demands she speak to him, forcing her to call out his title. She cries out, "Grand Duke." Satisfied, he leans into her ear and whispers the truth that underscores everything between them. He reminds her that, after all, he is Her Majesty's eternal servant. The scene fades into a haze of intensity. He muses that in a way she did the same for him earlier, blurring the lines between who is serving whom. The scene dissolves into a memory, a flashback to a much quieter, cooler night. We see a young Princess Marenrod standing in a moonlit garden near a fountain. A young Enoch approaches her, surprised to find her out at such an hour. He asks if she's feeling unwell. The princess, flustered, hides something behind her back, a wooden sword. She stammers that she was just going to practice swordsmanship. Young Enoch looks at her, his expression serious but not unkind. He tells her to keep it a secret that she saw him. As she looks at him, her internal monologue reveals the depth of her feelings even back then. She thinks about how stiff he looks, but reminds herself that they are engaged. She confesses to herself that she was incredibly happy when she found out her fiancé was him. She stares at his back, making a silent vow. She thinks that if she puts in more effort than she does now, maybe Enoch will feel happy about being engaged to her too. She desperately wants him to like her in return. In the quiet of her mind, she promises him, "It's okay, Enoch. I'll stay by your side to the very end." Her eyes, full of determination and hidden affection, focus on him as she thinks, "I will protect you." It's a heartbreaking reversal. The powerful Grand Duke who protects the Empire was the one she swore to shield. The memory ends with her repeating his name, Enoch, and finally admitting, "I truly like you," as the vision of her younger self fades. The heavy, emotional haze of the dream lifts. The Empress opens her eyes to the bright morning sun streaming through the window. She is alone in the large bed, the sheets tangled around her, the Duke nowhere to be seen. The room is quiet, leaving her, and us, to wonder how much of that intense devotion translates into the harsh light of day. A heavy morning, the morning light filtered into the room, but for her it didn't bring any energy. She had been lying there for so long that the simple act of waking up felt like a chore. The maid was hovering nearby, looking genuinely relieved to see her eyes open, chirping about how worried she'd been that her mistress was unwell. The maid had already prepared a light soup, hoping it would be easy enough for her to stomach, but she just stared at it. She turned her head away, murmuring that she had absolutely no appetite. It felt like her body was rejecting even the simplest sustenance. That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted. The maid didn't just accept the refusal. She dropped the one name that changed everything, His Grace the Grand Duke. The maid insisted she had to eat because he had ordered it. Apparently he was furious, legitimately angry, that she had pushed herself too too hard and collapsed. She tried to protest, insisting she was fine, but the maid stood firm. It wasn't a suggestion, it was the Grand Duke's direct order. The silence that followed was heavy. She realized the futility of arguing. Even in her own bedroom, his influence dictated her actions. With a resigned sigh, she finally picked up the spoon, forcing herself to eat not for hunger but to appease his anger. It felt less like a meal and more like a surrender. And later, she found herself in the council hall, and it felt like she was talking to a brick wall. She wondered if the Council of State had always just been her talking to herself. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. A nobleman cleared his throat, the sound patronizing in the large hall. He began the usual dance of objection. They claimed to hope she would consider their concerns, but the subtext was clear. They didn't want to do what she asked. They argued that her proposal would cause difficulties in managing their territories. She looked at them, her eyes tired but sharp. She reminded them that the empire had suffered through 3 straight years of poor harvests. Her voice was firm as she stated she couldn't put any more burden on the people. The nobleman countered immediately. He called her care for the people admirable, a word that sounded more like an insult in his tone. He lectured her, stating that relief measures should only be considered after tax reductions were put in place, implying her timing was wrong. He got to the crux of the matter. If they reduced taxes, the royal revenue would drop. He asked pointedly how she planned to fill the treasury then. The turning of the tide, the skepticism was open now. He asked if she really thought any noble would be willing to accept such a proposal. She shot back, asking why they wouldn't. She believed that in hard times it was the specific duty of the ruling class to give back. The room went silent, filled with the unspoken resistance of powerful men holding on to their wealth. They looked toward the Grand Duke Brecker. The assumption was obvious. Surely the most powerful man in the room would shut this idealistic nonsense down. The Grand Duke sat there, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair tightly. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then he spoke. He announced that the Grand Dukedom of Roark would reduce taxes. The shock in the room was palpable. The nobles started whispering frantically. The Duke turned his gaze to her. It was a look of terrifying obedience. He stated that if it was Her Majesty's will, he was ready to comply with anything. The wind was completely taken out of the opposition's sails. If the Grand Duke was taking that stance, the lesser nobles couldn't exactly refuse. The meeting ended with her order to gather opinions and report back, but the victory felt complicated. The walk back as they left the hall, a voice praised her situation. The noble remarked that she was truly fortunate. He noted that few emperors in history had ever possessed a vassal as loyal as the Grand Duke. She walked ahead, her expression cold. She answered vaguely, "Who knows?" Inside, she felt the irony burning her. She wasn't sure if she felt that loyalty the way they saw it. He watched her walk away, thinking that although she was acting cold now, someday she would recognize his steadfast loyalty. But the smirk on his face suggested his definition of loyalty was twisted. He told himself he could never be more than a loyal subject, but his eyes burned with a dark, possessive hunger. The collapse she sought escape in the gardens, desperate for a moment of solitude. She stumbled, her body failing her again. As she fell, she heard footsteps. She tried to snap that she didn't need attending, but the voice that answered sent a shiver down her spine. He told her he wasn't there to attend to her. He caught her easily, his arm supporting her weight. He looked down at her, his face unreadable but intense. He observed her critically, noting that her makeup was heavy, used to mask how pale she really was. His voice dropped lower, becoming intimate and dangerous. He told her to close her eyes and shut her ears. He reminded her with brutal honesty that he had put her on the throne for a specific reason, so she could indulge in luxury deep within the palace walls, not to exhaust herself with politics. A dark reminder, he moved closer, his hand touching her in a way that blurred the line between caring and claiming. She flinched, terrified that someone would see them in such a compromising position. She tried to pull away, gasping. He didn't let go. He told her he was only checking on her body and there was no need to be so tense. But his next words were a taunt. He asked why she was suddenly acting shy. He reminded her that from the start she shouldn't have forgotten how she got this far. The moment shifted into a dark memory. He loomed over her, the beautiful garden fading into the background of a bloody past. He reminded her that in the entirety of the empire she was the only royalty left. He forced her to remember the night of the coup. He reminded her that long ago he had spared only her. The memory was visceral, fire, blood, and him standing over her in her white dress. He brought up the price of her survival with crude, violent clarity. He asked if she would keep living by submitting to his most base, carnal desires, the specific degrading act she had performed to buy her life. His hand moved over her dress, touching her intimately, grounding her in the physical reality of his control. He smiled, a bloody, triumphant expression from the past overlapping with his face now. He had her completely trapped in his web of loyalty. The sunlight in the garden was too bright, too revealing for what was happening. She tried to push him back, her voice breathless and panicked. She reminded him, desperate for any excuse, that it was still daytime. It felt forbidden, the exposure making her skin crawl. He didn't seem to care about the sun or the exposure. His response was dismissive, almost mocking. shocking. He murmured that while the cover of night allowed for anything, the seclusion here was enough for him. He noted with the predator's calm that the garden was deserted. He moved against her, his actions blurring the line between affection and possession. She gasped, a small, involuntary sound escaping her lips as he kissed her skin. Her body reacted instinctively, flinching and trembling under his touch. It was a confusing mix of fear and sensation. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the reality of his lips moving over her. Inside her mind, the verdict was clear. She thought of him with pure disdain. He was behaving with no restraint, no dignity. To her in this moment he was no better than a beast, driven only by base instincts. A twisted kindness then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the pressure vanished. She lay there disoriented, her chest heaving. She opened her eyes, looking up at him in sheer confusion. He was hovering over her, but the aggression had bled out of his posture. Her internal question was simple and bewildered. Why? His hand moved, not to hold her down this time, but to gently fix her hair. His fingers brushed against her temple, tucking a loose strand back into place with a tenderness that felt jarringly out of character. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable but his voice calm. He explained himself as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He told her he had already given orders to the kitchen. He had commanded them to prepare a luncheon featuring all of her favorite plates. His thumb brushed her cheek, a possessive gesture. The cruelty returned in his tone, but it was wrapped in a strange sort of care. He ordered her to eat every last bite. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate for her survival. A few days later, the scene shifted to the opulence of the palace, but the mood was anything but relaxed. A few days had passed, and the noble faction was in a state of quiet hysteria. They were huddled together, whispering urgently. The consensus was grim. At this rate, they would be forced to follow her lead. They were incredulous that she was going after tax evasion of all things. It was a direct attack on their coffers, disguised as a royal order. One noble wiped sweat from his brow. He voiced the collective fear. How were they supposed to know what dirt the palace auditors would dig up once they started looking? Their secrets were in danger, but the real problem, they agreed, wasn't just the audit. It was the Grand Duke. They complained that his agreement to follow Her Majesty's will was the linchpin of their disaster. An older noble, likely Marquis Kellen, slammed his hand on the table. He hissed that this was exactly the problem. He declared that the Grand Duke couldn't keep allowing the Empress to pull his strings forever. Another noble tried to interject, alluding to the relationship those two had, but he was quickly hushed. They were terrified of being overheard. The past that haunts, they turned their attention to a younger man, Duke Sillars, who seemed out of the loop. They realized he hadn't been a duke for long. The older nobles decided it was time for a history lesson to explain the complex web they were caught in. They spoke of the late emperor. He had greatly cherished the Empress back when she was just a princess. It was expected, they noted, since she was the first princess born to the royal family in 100 years. His love for her was protective to the point of paranoia. He had drawn up a list of suitors, men with nothing to their names but good looks and decent personalities. His goal was simple. He wanted her to marry someone harmless so she could live comfortably and be loved. But the princess had a spine even then. She opposed his plan. The narrative shifted to a memory of the late emperor speaking kindly to a young Aaron. He told her to marry someone she truly cherished and loved, and she did. The fiancé she brought home was the Grand Duke Roark. The tragic groom Sillars's eyes widened as the memory clicked. He remembered visiting the palace with his father years ago. He recalled seeing the two of them, Aaron and her fiancé, walking in the gardens. He noted how happy they had looked together. He whispered the name, Enoch. The older noble shook his head solemnly. He stated that it was all pointless now. Barely a year after their betrothal, that Grand Duke Roark, Enoch, was executed for treason. The implication hung heavy in the air. The man holding the title now, Brecker, was not the man she had loved. Or perhaps the history was even bloodier than Sillars knew. The nobles decided it was time to drive a wedge. They needed to make their position clear to Her Majesty. They turned to Sillars, putting him on the spot. They asked him what he thought, effectively nominating him for the dangerous task of confronting the current Grand Duke. Denied audience, Sillars found himself standing in a lavish antechamber, facing a stone-faced servant. He was trying to get an audience, but he was being politely stonewalled. The servant apologized, but stated firmly that an audience wasn't possible right now. Sillars pressed, insisting it was urgent. He asked if it was really so hard to arrange even a brief meeting. The servant hesitated, searching for a diplomatic way to explain the unexplainable. He finally admitted that Her Majesty was currently with His Grace, the Grand Duke. He added with a heavy implication that their conversations tended to take a long time. Sillars froze. What? The rumors were one thing, but the reality of the Empress and the Grand Duke being locked away together during the day was another. Entering the lion's den, Sillars stood before the large doors, likely questioning everything he had just learned. He uttered the title Grand Duke Roark, as if testing the weight of it against the current occupant. From inside, a voice, likely a servant or perhaps the Duke himself acknowledging an entry, called out, "Yes, Your Majesty." The perspective shifted to the interior. The room was dark, imposing. A figure sat there, radiating authority and danger. The voice cut through the silence, silence commanding and sharp. "Please speak." Behind closed doors, the atmosphere in the Grand Duke's office was heavy and stifling. The professional distance between them had completely collapsed, replaced by a heated, intimate exchange that left no room for words, only sensation. Time seemed to suspend as they were locked in a private, compromising embrace. She lay there, her mind hazy, barely registering the reality of where they were. He whispered against her skin, his voice dark with satisfaction. He noted that even the marks he had left previously had faded, a possessive observation that claimed her body as a canvas for his memory. He told her not to force herself to stay silent, urging her to let go of the restraint that defined her public life. The unwanted guest suddenly, a sharp knock shattered the bubble of their intimacy. A voice from the other side of the heavy wooden doors called out, asking if he could spare some time. She jolted, her eyes flying open in sheer panic. The reality of the situation came crashing back down. They were in the main office in the middle of the day. If anyone walked in now, the servant outside, unaware of the tension he was causing, apologized for the interruption but insisted it was urgent. He announced that Duke Sillars had requested an immediate meeting. The Duke, she thought, her mind racing. Why? A dangerous game. She looked up at Brecker, expecting him to pull away to fix the situation. Instead, he looked down at her with a terrifying calmness. He asked, almost casually, if she was going to let him in. He asked if she intended to let the Duke see this scene. She panicked, thinking she needed to clean up to hide the evidence of what they had been doing, but he held her fast. He pointed out the cruelty of her predicament. She couldn't possibly open that door and show herself to others in her current state. He didn't stop. He challenged the very idea of anyone daring to meddle in his private matters. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that was both a promise and a threat. He told her she could ask for his head if he ever failed her, but until then he was in control. He warned her that if she kept indulging him like this, his bad habits were only going to get worse. A memory of warmth in the midst of the fear and the overwhelming sensation, her mind fractured. She looked at him, but the dark, imposing office faded away. She whispered his name, but it wasn't the title of the Grand Duke. Enoch. Suddenly, she wasn't the Empress trapped in a power play. She was a young princess, lying in a soft bed, sick with a cold. And he wasn't the monster who tormented her. He was the young man who had come all the way from the battlefield just to check on her. In the memory, he looked at her with such unmasked adoration. He told her not to worry about her appearance, assuring her that she always looked lovely to him. She asked if he really came just for her, and he admitted he had been so worried he got special permission from her father, the Emperor. She remembered her father's voice, protective and stern, telling Enoch that Erin was their precious daughter, worth more than all the gold in the world. He had asked Enoch to be gentle with her, and Enoch had promised. He had sworn he would never forgive anyone who dared to hurt her feelings. The bitter truth, the memory was so sweet it hurt. She remembered clutching his sleeve, confessing that she liked him. She remembered telling him that she would do anything if he kept being sweet to her. She had begged him to stay with her like that forever, but the sweetness curdled into ash. The voice of the present, or perhaps her own guilt, cut through the nostalgia. The narrative shifted violently back to the brutal reality. The leaders of his great house had been cut down by the very Emperor who had once given his blessing. Enoch had ended up as a fangless dog, stripped of his power and dignity. The internal voice mocked him, calling him a fool for refusing to accept the cruel reality of the battlefield. It reminded him of the ultimate betrayal. The Empress herself, the girl who had claimed she would do anything for him, had given up on his title and sold him out. He had been declared a dirty traitor. The beautiful memory was just a lie now, buried under years of blood and resentment. The question hung in the air, unasked but felt. Now, don't you wish you had married someone else? But in the silence of the office, held in his arms, the answer was a suffocating void. A public humiliation. The moment shifted into something private, and time passed quietly between them. The air inside the office was thick with heat and the scent of their indiscretion. She was trembling, clutching her disheveled clothes to her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The knocking at the door hadn't stopped. If anything, the presence of the servant and Duke Sillars waiting beyond made the walls feel like they were closing in. She looked at Brecker, pleading with her eyes for silence, for discretion. But he looked back with a dark, mischievous glint. Instead of smoothing things over, he raised his voice, pitching it perfectly so it would carry through the heavy wooden doors. He announced to the servant outside that the Empress likes to enjoy herself, framing her panic as indulgence. Her eyes went wide. It was a calculated humiliation, a reminder that her reputation was entirely in his hands. The strike, something inside her snapped. The fear curdled instantly into white-hot rage. Without thinking, she lashed out. Slap! The sound cracked through the room, sharp and decisive. Her hand stung from the impact and his head whipped to the side. She stared at him, her chest heaving, waiting for the retaliation. She demanded to know how absurd he thought she looked in this predicament, daring him to say it out loud. He turned back to her slowly. There was a bright red mark blooming on his cheek, but he wasn't angry. If anything, he looked amused. He bowed his head in a mockery of submission, murmuring that his humble opinion was nothing compared to hers. Empty threats. She didn't back down. Fueled Fueled by the adrenaline, she spat venom at him. She asked why she shouldn't just confine him to an underground prison for the rest of his life. She threatened to sell him to some nameless man for a pittance, just to see him humbled. He listened calmly, kneeling before her as he adjusted his own clothes. He countered smoothly that he had only been acting according to her own desires. He told her she didn't need to feel shame or build up her pride in front of him. He offered himself up completely, telling her she could ask him for anything she wanted. The mask slipped. She looked down at him, seeing through the facade. She accused him of deception, pointing out that not even once had he actually tried to follow her orders properly. He caught her wrist, his touch firm. He told her to simply follow what she truly desired, regardless of what she claimed to want politically. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. He reminded her that she was the one who chose him to be her toy in the first place. But then, his expression shifted into something darker, hungrier. He observed that there was no such thing as a toy with the pride to rebel like she just had. And that, he admitted, was exactly what he was looking for. The moment shifted into something private, and time passed quietly between them. The exit outside the office, the atmosphere was tense. The servant bowed nervously as the heavy doors finally opened. Duke Silas stood there, stiff and formal, waiting for his audience. Brecker stepped out, looking surprisingly composed for a man who had been locked in with the Empress for hours. He buttoned his coat, casually informing Silas that Her Majesty was in a bad mood, and suggesting he be careful. Silas blinked, his eyes catching on something undeniable. There, stark against the Grand Duke's pale skin, was the clear, red imprint of a hand. A twisted pride Silas couldn't help but comment. He noted that he could see the Grand Duke had received a pretty good slap. Brecker touched his cheek, unfazed. He admitted he expected a reaction like that after what happened, but he claimed to be rather glad that the issue could be solved with a single slap. Silas looked at him with a mix of confusion and pity. He couldn't picture a man of Brecker's stature getting into such a mess. He worried aloud that he might have applied for a meeting with no hope of success today. Brecker reassured him with a terrifying sort of confidence. He said it would be fine. Then, he added a possessive caveat that chilled the air. In this world, the only person to whom she would show that side of herself is me. Silas watched him, his mind racing back to the past. He remembered the two of them engaged a year ago, how happy they had looked. He knew the political reality. The nobles were planning to have Grand Duke Roark executed for treason soon. This man standing before him was a walking dead man, yet he acted like he owned the palace. Brecker broke his train of thought, asking why Silas was requesting a meeting today. Silas straightened up. He replied that it was in relation to their last meeting. Brecker's eyes narrowed slightly. He stepped in, acting as the gatekeeper. He told Silas that since the Empress was in a bad mood, it would be better if Silas showed him what he had prepared first. It was a power move, an attempt to intercept the information before it reached Erin. Silas hesitated. He held the documents tighter. He apologized, but stood his ground. He stated firmly that he thought it would be better to discuss this first with the Empress herself. The line was drawn. The young Duke wasn't going to be bullied so easily. The standoff the hallway was quiet, but the air between the two men crackled with tension. Brecker stood there, leaning in with that casual, terrifying confidence of his. He asked, almost as if he were doing Silas a favor, if it wouldn't be better to hear about the matter later through Her Majesty. It was a transparent attempt to control the flow of information, to filter what reached the Empress's ears. Silas paused, his expression hardening. He realized he had been too lax. He straightened his posture, looking the Grand Duke in the eye. He stated firmly that if the matter was of great importance, then of course Her Majesty should be the first to know. He drove the point home with a reminder of the hierarchy that Brecker seemed to have forgotten. After all, she is the ruler of this empire. Brecker stared at him, a silence stretching between them. Just as the tension threatened to snap, a servant's voice cut through. Duke Silas, Her Majesty has granted you an audience. Brecker's composure cracked just for a second. He repeated the words, clearly caught off guard. She has granted him an audience. Then a low, dry laugh escaped him. It was the sound of a man realizing his leash wasn't quite as tight as he thought. The audience, a different air. Silas entered the office, leaving the brooding Grand Duke behind. The room was bathed in light, a stark contrast to the dark hallway. The Empress sat at her desk, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. He approached her, bowing deeply. As he straightened, he couldn't help but study her. She looked calm, composed, but there was a heaviness to her silence that felt new. They moved to the business at hand. Silas began his report on the noble faction's reaction to the tax audits. He explained that the backlash was fierce, exactly as they had feared. However, he offered a sliver of hope. He told her that he did not believe reconciliation was impossible. He started to outline a path forward, a way to smooth things over. Dismissal enough. Her voice was quiet but final. She cut him off mid-sentence. She looked at him with tired eyes. I understand what it is you wish to say. She didn't want to hear the optimism or the strategies. It was as if she had already accepted a reality he couldn't see. She simply thanked him, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you, Duke. Lingering questions. The walk away. Silas left the office, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. He let out a long sigh. The tension tension of the day finally catching up to him. He walked down the corridor, his mind replaying the interaction. Something was off, he thought to himself. She seemed a little different today. The image of the Grand Duke and the red mark on his face flashed in his mind. He wondered, is it because of the Grand Duke? He remembered Brecker's arrogant claim from earlier. I am the only one who can make her angry. At the time it had sounded like a boast. Now it sounded like a warning. Silas stopped, looking back toward the closed doors. A question formed in his mind, one that the entire court seemed to be whispering but no one dared to ask. Just what exactly happened between you two? He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Never mind, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep. The history between the Empress and her loyal dog was clearly far more tangled and dangerous than anyone realized. A glimmer of hope in the quiet of her room, away from the suffocating gaze of the court, she held a letter that felt like a lifeline. It was from Marquis Maxwell. His words were polite, steeped in the formal grace of the old nobility, but the message was clear and promising. He expressed his deep pleasure at receiving her letter after such a long time. He addressed the heavy issue of taxation directly. Instead of dismissing it like the council, he believed discussion was necessary. He promised that if she set a date, he would come to the capital to meet her.